And
there you are.
coming in. Started in a moment. Online. But we're going to get started today.
There's a buzzy noise that sounds like a lawnmower.
Is that coming from the outside thing? So the microphone was, I don't know which microphone it was picking up, but it must have been coming into the sound. But yes, someone was
I can still hear it.
So that's not us. Let me see. You think so? Hold it.
I'm here.
Yeah, I know, but
It's not coming from me.
Or me.
Not here.
Hold it here. You see.
Not me either.
Scales. It's on your side, Gail. I don't know. You got to unmute yourself when you want to say something, but that's where it was coming from somehow. I don't know why.
What would cause that?
I don't know, but that's where it's coming from.
Okay, I'll turn me off.
Yeah, you got to unmute yourself when you got to say something. Because there's a lot to be said today. Today we're reading the story of Absalom. Son. And we're going to read why. What happens. But yeah, and there's probably some people online who are going to want to add to the discussion as well. Wait 1 second. Let me just make sure we're actually on Facebook. But last week we read the story of David and Bathsheba, which was a pretty wild story. Yeah, we're on Facebook. We got people. Yeah, I'm checking. No, we're live for 4 minutes. Here we go. Here's Doreen. So we still got some people coming in. Yeah, we're on Facebook. And
am I still buzzing?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're very loud too.
No, I know. It's not that you're loud.
No, I mean your system is loud.
Rosemary was not into
I get to say things that rabbis can't say.
You're very loud. No, it's just your mic. And your mic is sensitive, Gail. That's okay. It's not bad. Your mic is sensitive as well, Mary. You're correct. You're correct. In a good way. Sometimes. Oh my gosh. So folks, before we start, now that we have Doreen, we can start. Doreen's feeling better, right? Good. 2 weeks, huh? Is that how long? Wow. So I was in Mexico this weekend, down in Rosarito for a wedding. My cousin got married, and we were down there. The wedding was Saturday night, and we were out in the water. I went out swimming in the ocean, and I had a very close call. So I got caught in a riptide, and I couldn't stay up. I couldn't stay over the water. I mean, there was no lifeguard. My family was at the beach. There was my cousins and aunts and uncle. And I started waving in the water. And at first they thought I was just saying hi. And I was like, no, I'm screaming. I can't stay afloat. So I was caught in this, and it was really scary. And there were some rocks over on the side, and I just kind of swam towards the rocks. And I was like, if I can get to the rocks, I'm not going to, I won't go under. So I went in and I slammed in, and I'm cut all over
Oh, dear.
my legs and arms and stuff. But I was just so happy to get on the rocks that I didn't care. I was like, and my hands cut up and all my legs and stuff. But it was a close one. So, but it was kind of ironic because again, my family thought I was waving to them, and was not. I was trying to not die. But yeah, I know that. Well, fortunately, I get to live to tell the tale. But definitely, treat you remember how powerful the ocean is, and respect that. You can understand why people worship Neptune and Poseidon, because it doesn't care. The water doesn't care. So it was definitely a scary moment or two. I was so tired afterwards. I was cut up and it doesn't hurt that much, but I was so exhausted. I was literally like every fiber of my muscles were tired. And I just kind of went back and showered off and slept. I just couldn't. But I did the wedding that night, and my cousin's a big surfer, the one who was getting married. So he said I was just stupid to go out without fins. But what really happened was I had the boogie board, and as I was on the boogie board, the wave took it, and the leash snapped, and I didn't have the boogie board anymore. So I really didn't have any way of, like, I didn't know what I was going to do. No, the boogie board lived. The boogie board made it back to shore. Yeah, that was another concern, was whether we were going to get charged for the boogie board, but no, we didn't. But yeah, all those things kind of seem secondary. No. Okay, so you weren't that. No, but I do. Whatever. No, but the problem was there was no lifeguard, and that was a stupid thing. I never should have gone out without a lifeguard. So swim, yeah. Well, yeah, you go parallel to the shore, but that's what I did. I went to the rocks, and that's how I got out. But I was so happy to get on the rocks. I didn't even care that I was getting cut up. I wasn't getting cut up, but it was a close one. People said, my family was like, my kids were saying, did you pray? And I was like, yeah, I was too busy trying to stay alive. I didn't really pray. I did afterwards. There's a prayer you're supposed to say, the Gomel prayer, when you survive a close one. But it is one of those things where, like a car accident sometimes, where you didn't get in the car accident, but if you had, that would have been it. So yeah, there's a prayer for that, for sure. So there's definitely a sense of that. And again, one of the interesting things about the prayers that we say every day is that they really are supposed to remind us every day that, look, anything could happen. You can get an aneurysm, you can have a heart attack. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason for how some days, a woman wakes up and it's going to be their last day and they don't know it. But interesting. A near-death experience. Yeah. Look, I get it, but according to that logic, you're really supposed to say the Gomel in the immediate aftermath of when it happened, when you're still feeling that sense of, wow, that was a close one. And the Gomel prayer basically says, God, thank you for giving me this gift that I don't deserve. Which is an interesting idea, because you'd think you're supposed to be, have like a different attitude, but really it's an attitude of, I didn't do anything to deserve this. I got caught a break. And it is that sense of, you don't come out of it going, oh, God must love me more, or something like that. You don't come out of it like that. You come out of it with a sense of humility. So, but again, every day that sense of prayer is so this is what I would say to that, is every day we say the prayer. I mean, traditionally we said the prayer, the Amidah, we say Mechayeh HaMeitim, that God gives life to the dead, or Mechayeh HaKol, God gives life to everything. Because the Reform movement didn't like the idea of resurrection of the dead, literally, so they changed Mechayeh Meitim to Mechayeh HaKol. That's why there's that difference. But if you say the Mechayeh Meitim or Mechayeh HaKol, whatever, what it actually, you can interpret it as, is that every breath you take is giving life to your body, that if any of those breaths stop, you're dead. So every breath essentially is giving life to the dead. If the breathing stops, life stops. So every day is that. What? I did, but I mean, I didn't like, no, I mean, I drank bottled water, but I mean, I also, the ocean, I tried not to, but yeah, but a little bit, but I didn't take in a lot of water. I knew that if I did, it was not going to be good. So, yeah, it was a weird weekend, but, yeah, thankfully, live another round. Anyways, so with that being this part of the story today, not that it really relates that much to this week's portion, but it definitely relates a lot to the Bible and to the story of King David, who has a lot of near death experiences, including one that we're going to get to today. And he wrote about it. He wrote about his near death experiences, or at least we believe he did in the Psalms. He talked about walking in the valley of the shadow of death. That's not about being in the cemetery, by the way. We always think of that Psalm 23 because we say it oftentimes in the cemetery, but it's not. It's about being in close calls and coming out and saying, God, prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. It basically saying that even when I'm in a dangerous situation, God's taking care of me. Not God's going to bury me in a cemetery. That's not what it's about, which is why people, kind of miss the point of what Psalm 23 and most of the Psalms are really about. They're not about the person who died. It's about the people who live, and that, actually the translation is really bad of Psalm 23, because it says at the end that I will dwell in the house of God forever. It's not what it says. It says, I will dwell in the house of God, which we assume to be the temple, or to be in the presence of God in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, for all the length of my days. I don't know. We can look, Mary, what does the King James say? I think it says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But the translation is orech yamim, for the length of my days, which clearly doesn't mean forever. It means, what does it King James say for Psalm 23? Yeah. But the translation is not a good one, because orech yamim literally means the length of my days. Yamim are days, and orech are the length of. Some translations translate it as length of my days, but that literally means in this world, the length of my days. Being said at funerals a long time ago. But yeah, hundreds of years ago. But the point is that it was not supposed to be about the person that we're putting in the earth. And everybody thinks that's what it is, because it says that God, lays me down in the green fields. And the people go, well, that must be a cemetery. But it wasn't, because they used to bury people in caves anyways. So like the whole concept of like what's going on there, it has a new meaning, I guess, to people, but that's not really what it's about. So we're going to see what it's about as we get into King David's life and into his. And don't worry, Francine, I'm just letting Francine in. We have not started reading yet. We're about to, but we're going to share King David's life now. King David has had so far a lot of success. He's been given success over all his enemies. In the last week's reading, we read it in the last couple of chapters. We read about how he takes another man's wife. He basically has Uriah killed off, and he winds up. He already had slept with his wife, Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, and got her pregnant. Nathan the prophet comes and tells David essentially, and kind of has him pronounce his own sentence by giving him a parable and basically saying, you took away this man's wife, his only wife. You have lots of wives, and you had to take away this wife. And he says, the baby that you had is now going to die. The baby that was born is going to die. And the baby does, even though David prays really hard and tries to have that baby live, the baby dies anyways. And there's another part of that punishment, and I will look at it because it's this week's section that we're reading about. Yeah. 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 Well, that's what the name means, right? Her father, it says, is not. Yeah. Bathsheba by that point had like a name. It was a name, right? So Bathsheba meant the daughter of an oath, or a daughter of promise, or daughter of seven. And again, it's we talked about how it's related to the Bat Shua in Genesis. For those who are with us on the Wednesday night class, you're going to, even if you weren't, you're going to see a little bit this week, because this week, all of it comes together. The Genesis parallels all hit us this week. So we're actually going to go back and forth a little bit today to see those parallels from Genesis chapter 34, 38, 37. Those chapters of Genesis, which deal with Jacob and his children, because it's not just the boys, it's also about Dinah. We're going to see all those things come together in the story this week, which was set up by last week's. But let me just show you again. One of the things that David says, because you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And again, they always call Bathsheba not the daughter of Eliam, who's her father, but he calls her, and other people call her, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And because you did this, right, I will make calamity arise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes, and he shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. Which again is all part of the punishment, which is also, by the way, so just like he took someone's wife, now his own kids are going to take his wife, or one of his sons, assumedly, again, is going to take your wife. That's pretty bad. So his son's going to die. This baby that they conceived is going to die. His sons, or some son is going to sleep with his wife or your wives, it actually says. There's actually a third part of this, right? Which is when he tells him, he says, you acted in secret, but I will make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight, which again seems to be consistent with this, under this very sun. And again, they translated the word here, sun, as broad daylight, hashemesh, but it's the same word, under the sun. And so everything that's going to happen to you is not going to happen in secret. You tried to pull this thing off in secret, everything's going to be exposed. And more importantly, your punishment is going to happen in front of everybody. You're not going to get punished in secret. Everyone will see what's going to happen to you. So that's kind of the third part of this, if you will. It's not the third part, it's the part that links all of it together, which is this public humiliation that King David is going to have. So this is where we're going to pick up now in chapter 13, which is one of the more famous parts of King David's reign, the story of Absalom, his son. So we will continue now, and we're going to start reading. So Rosemary, if you'd take it away.
This happened sometime afterward. Absalom, son of David, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, son of David, became infatuated with her.
Right. So Absalom is a son of David through actually a Canaanite or non-Israelite queen named Maacah. And David has two children, at least, with this woman. One is named Absalom and one is named Tamar. He also has another son from another wife named Amnon. So Absalom and Tamar are full siblings. Amnon is their half sibling. Shouldn't be too confusing, other than, just keeping these names separate. Amnon and Absalom are both sons of David, both princes. And by the way, it says that Tamar was beautiful. We also read that Absalom was beautiful. We don't know that Amnon was hideous, but we do know that Absalom and his sister Tamar, we're going to learn about Absalom later, his beauty, but his sister is very beautiful. Her name is Tamar, which means date, like the palm tree fruit, date. Source of honey and sweetness.
Amnon was so distraught because of his half-sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Amnon had a friend named Yonadab, the son of David's brother Shema. Yonadab was a very clever man.
So Amnon has a friend named Yonadav, and Yonadav is his buddy and his cousin, and very clever. And this theme of friends is very important for this story, and also the stories in Genesis, because it's oftentimes the friends that kind of get their friends in trouble. So this is not uncommon. That, again, it's not an excuse, but sometimes people's friends are not helpful. Yeah. And again, keep this in mind as we're reading this story. Then we flash back to Genesis. Here we go.
He asked him, "Why are you so dejected, O prince, morning after morning? Tell me." Amnon replied, "I am in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." Yonadav said to him, "Lie down in your bed and pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in front of me so that I may look on, and let her serve it to me.'"
So this is the plan. What? Yeah, the soap opera. This is 100% not something you'd probably even see on American television, because it would be.
It's in Oklahoma.
This is pretty pressing that this is a brother doing this, planning to do this to his sister. Again, there's also a theme in this about food, preparing food and using food as a way of tricking people, which we also saw in the book of Genesis, right? And how Jacob tricks his father Esau using meal, right? So this is also a theme that we have in Genesis. You think about it. The Jacob stories, making a food and using it as a way of tricking them.
Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. The kings came to see him, and Amnon said to the king, "Let my sister Tamar come and prepare a couple of cakes in front of me, and let her bring them to me." David sent a message to Tamar in the palace, "Please go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him."
So Amnon does this trick. He pretends to be sick, and he gets his father to do this. So this is a ruse, obviously. We know right from the beginning. There's never a question that it's his sister. It's repeated over and over again. And of course, what happens in this horrible story is that David becomes implicated in the story, right? He becomes an unwilling accomplice in this story, because he's the one who actually tells her to do it. She can't disobey him. He's the king. Her father commanded her to go do it. And this is horrible. It's not just like somebody asked her to go do it. He asked her to do it. Part of the tragedy and power of this story.
Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was in bed. She took dough and kneaded it into cakes in front of him and cooked the cakes. She took the pan and set out the cakes, but Amnon refused to eat and ordered everyone to withdraw. After everyone had withdrawn, Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food inside and feed me." Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them to her brother inside.
Yeah, and the details of this, the details are very, very key here. The discussions are very in depth. Everything is laid out here for everybody to see how he did it. He told everybody to get out. It doesn't just say he got her alone. It says specifically how he did it. He told, "I can't eat. I need everyone to leave." Everyone leaves. And now he says, "Bring it to me."
But when she served them to him, he caught hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, sister." But she said to him, "Don't, brother, don't force me. Such things are not done in Israel. Don't do such a vile thing. Where will I carry my shame? And you will be like any of the scoundrels in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not refuse me to you."
So this is a horrific scene where a woman knows she's about to be raped and she's begging for her life. She's begging for protection. It's very hard to read this. Her appeals, don't do this, don't force this, ask for permission and, he'll do it. Now, it's not likely that he's going to do that because it's not legal. It's not likely that he's going to do it, but she's trying to say anything she can, and she says, don't do these things, aren't done in Israel. And then she says, you'll be like any of the scoundrels, the Nevalim, which again is not a good word. It's the root for the word naval, which is fool or oaf, an idiot, you'll be like any of those people. Which again, how could there be people like that if she just said there aren't people like that? So clearly she's trying to say anything she can. And she knows on one hand, she'll say, don't do something that nobody has ever done before. And then she says, then you'll just be like if you do this, you'll lose stature. You'll become like the worst people in our, they'll be like the worst people in our country. So she's trying everything. And it's just 2 verses, but look how many different things that she says. Don't do it, brother. She appeals to him as a brother. Don't force me. Such things aren't done. Don't do such a horrible thing, a vile thing. Because his father wouldn't have let it happen. His father would have looked at him and said, are you some kind of sick? What's wrong with you? You're sick. It's your sister. He didn't. He just wanted to have the satisfaction of his own body. Then he says, no, but there's parts of this that are really, really upsetting because they do get to the sickness that people have. Where will I carry my shame? That's her other, but that's not going to appeal to him. Think about your stature though. Think about what people will think of you. Be like any, hoodlum. And then, again, speak to the king, And, Amnon is one of the favored sons. He's one of the oldest sons. He's like heir. He's an heir.
But he would not listen to her. He overpowered her and lay with her by force.
Now, this is about the clearest description we ever have of a rape in the Bible. This is critical because we're going to go back and look at the story from Dinah in a second. And you'll see the similarities. When we talk about whether Dinah was raped back in Genesis chapter 34, we'll look at that story quickly, but we'll look at it in a second. So this is, wouldn't listen to her. He overpowered her and lay with her by force. He forced her. So that's what happened. Now, let's see what happened after.
Then Amnon felt a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing for her was greater than the passion he had felt for her. And Amnon said to her, "Get out." She pleaded with him, "Please don't commit this wrong. To send me away would be even worse than the first wrong you committed against me." But he would not listen to her.
So just as he wouldn't listen to her when she said no, now he won't listen to her when he says to her, "Get out." Now, when people say this is such a weird story because, it seems so bizarre that someone would feel that way. But this is 100% one of those stories that we talk about in the Bible, like we did when we looked at the story of Michal a few weeks ago, watching King David. These emotions, these personal, very personal, intimate feelings that are exposed in this part of the Bible, especially in this part of the Bible, where you literally walk away going, oh my gosh, this is, like Doreen said, a soap opera, but even more so, this really happens. So we talk about it in fiction, we talk about it in movies or whatever, television, but the reality is this really happens. This passion, this desire, this lust he had for her is then matched by this sense of shame and anger and disgust that he has for himself, for her. Is once he does this, he has no love for her. He wants her out because he saw a beautiful woman. Unfortunately and tragically and whatever else you want to say, it is his sister. And then he's hit with this reaction. Probably, I mean, obviously, I would say kind of like, how do we know? But it's enhanced by his shame and his knowledge that what he did was completely wrong. Not only did he rape a woman, which again, as a king, as a prince, as an heir, to the throne, he would have gotten away with. But he can't get away with this. And this is the fulfillment of the prophecy that Nathan had said last chapter was going to happen, which is that this is what's going to happen to David's own family. His problem is going to be his own family. His own family is going to be his curse. Yeah. So what happens now is that his punishment, right, is not going to be that his throne is taken away. It's not that he's going to lose battles, right, like King Saul did, died in battle. He's going to suffer at home, which arguably is worse. But yeah, as you said, it's a fitting punishment because there's some kind of feeling of justice here, which is that he caused this horrible thing to happen, killed a man, killed Uriah. We're going to see what happens in his own house. And to some extent, when he learns, when this happens, the punishment for this must have been worse for him than any punishment that could have been visited on him personally. When we see this play out, King David must have said, kind of says it, but he says it later in a couple chapters, I would rather be dead than have to live through this. It would have been better if the punishment was I'm going to die. But remember, the punishment also came with a hopeful situation, which is that the throne would not leave his family. So even though he has to suffer through this, his family is not going to lose power, which is, I guess you could say, the one piece of hope that he has, that unlike Saul, his predecessor, his family are going to retain the monarchy. Of course. Oh yeah. I mean, the family is cursed by what David does. Oh, I mean, yeah, Tamar's punishment is terrible. No, but what happens is that people are punished for the sins of their parents, not because we think it's fair, but because it's true. We talk about this in the Bible where it says, again, do the sins of the father visited on the children. Well, it wasn't her fault, but she's caught up in this cycle, if you will. And so she does. Look, you can say, well, it's not her fault because she didn't do anything wrong, right? But because of her position, all of this played out. So she's been treated as a princess for the last however many years, 20 years. And now, because she's a princess and because her brother was the prince, there isn't going to be any justice anymore. Her brother can't be punished in a normal way. There's not going to be any justice or vindication for her the way that there should be. She knows it. She knew it all along. She's thinking to herself, even if I survive this rape, what's going to happen to the guy that just raped me? How's the prince going to be punished? So this is where her stature, where her position comes back to be part of the trap that she's in, the whatever consequences are going to happen here. They're not normal consequences either. So here's what he says.
He summoned his young attendant and said, "Get that woman out of my presence and bar the door behind her." She was wearing an ornamented tunic, for maiden princesses were customarily dressed in such garments. His attendant took her outside and barred the door after her.
Yeah. So here we get this one situation where we have to comment on it now. Well, we'll comment on the fact that he threw her out and had that woman, actually the attendant is told, get that woman out of here and lock the door. She's not coming back in. I want to see her, get her out. And she walks out wearing the ornamented tunic. And again, here's where we have to say something. We have to. No, because it says ornamented tunic. Now, if we all spoke Hebrew, we would notice the words ketonet pasim. These two words that are technically really, the fancy word for it is a hapax legomenon, which is the Greek for a word that only happens once. This word actually happens twice, but only twice in the entire Bible. And Mike and Mary, where is this word from? Yep. And specifically, Mary got it right away. You said Joseph.
Sure I did.
No, you knew Joseph. It is the story of Joseph's coat. His coat of many colors. The Bible only has 2 times that the word ketonet pasim. The word pasim is actually only there once or twice. The word ketonet means a garment, outer garment. It's a coat. But the word pasim is the word that's only there. So how do we translate pasim? Well, if you're going to translate it consistently, as this translation does, if you look back in Genesis chapter 37, it's the same word. It's translated as ornamented tunic. So it can either be coat of many colors. What's the King James call it? I hope they translated Genesis 37:3 with the same words, because those are the only 2 times it happens in the whole Bible. So when we see that, we got to say, whoa, that's not a coincidence. Joseph and Tamar are the only people who have a coat of many colors. Now, interestingly, it says that in those days, that's the way princesses were dressed, which, by the way, what's Joseph wearing a coat that normally princesses wear? I'm serious, because the Bible just said maiden princesses, Banot Hamelech, which is the daughters of the king. Batulim, by the way, which is why they're maiden princesses. That assumes a virgin princess, by the way, wore those coats. So Joseph is wearing a coat that later on is described as only things that the princesses wear before they get married, which is interesting because, again, for a 17-year-old boy to be wearing a coat like that, again, seems to imply that he's wearing clothes that normally women wear. And I will point out that the rabbis do catch on to that and say that Joseph liked to dress up a little too flamboyantly, let's put it that way. But that is a knock on Joseph in the rabbinic literature, because the Bible we know the Bible sees, hey, it calls out to look at this. Now, what's most important, of course, is that these parallels between Genesis, between 34 and 38 are just too obvious. I mean, they're just, this one is the most obvious because the word is so unique, and she's wearing the coat, and watch what happens with the coat.
Tamar put dust on her head and wrenched the ornamented tunic she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and walked away, screaming loudly as she went.
Yeah. She tore it up, which is exactly what happens to the coat of many colors. The coat of many colors was torn by the brothers and dipped in blood so that Jacob would think that he was killed. in the movie, maybe, or in the musical. I don't remember. But in the book of the Bible, we read it in Genesis chapter 37, his father gave it to him. Doesn't say who made it, but maybe. And it's a nice midrash. What would the coat look like? Did it have dreams on it? Did it have technicolors? I don't know. But we know that the coats are only mentioned 2 times in the Bible, and both the 2 times that they're worn, they get ripped. And it's essentially a sign of death because they put ash dust on her head afar, which is that's what you do when someone dies. She did it to mourn her own situation of being raped. She's crying, she's screaming, and she walks away. This is horrific. And this scene again harkens back to Genesis. Can't be a coincidence. Can't. You can't have a word that only appears 2 places in the entire Bible and you don't notice it. The rabbis noticed it. Again, for people who look at why the Bible is the way it is, the way it's constructed, it can't be a coincidence. However you look at it. So we'll look at it in a second. We'll look back at the Genesis story in a second. Well, let's look at what the reaction will be. Because Tamar clearly wants a reaction. You don't do this. You don't scream. You don't rend your clothes. It's not like she kept it a secret, right? She shouldn't have. I'm not saying she should have, but she didn't. She's going to get a reaction. It's an interesting reaction.
Her brother Absalom said to her, "Was it your brother Amnon who did this to you? For the present, sister, keep quiet about it. He is your brother. Don't brood over the matter." And Tamar remained in her brother Absalom's house forlorn. When King David heard about all this, he was greatly upset.
So what happened? Absalom knew right away, right? Absalom asked her, "Was it your brother Amnon?" He doesn't say. Doesn't seem like she said anything. We don't even know. He knows. He knew what was going on. He sensed it. And what does he tell her? Keep quiet about it. He is your brother. Now, I mean, she knows it's her brother. But he says this to her more probably out of the mindset of we have to be careful about how we handle this because he's your brother. This isn't like any other guy that raped you. This is your brother. This is a king. I mean, a heir to the king. This is a possible king one day, the heir. We can't just do what we would normally do, which was get vengeance or have some accountability here for this. But he also says, don't brood over the matter. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, right? He's going to tell her not to brood over it, not to be upset. Well, guess what? Doesn't work. She stays in his house, and it says the word forlorn. So she is going to brood over it. She is going to be upset. It says so. Now, is she upset because there's not going to be any justice? Is she upset because she was raped? Is she upset? I mean, all of these could be part of it. But Absalom, as we're about to see, is not going to let this slide. But he also knows he's got to be careful of what he does. He can't just take revenge. So let's see what he does. We're going to read now about the revenge. As we said, this is definitely Game of Thrones.
Absalom didn't utter a word to Amnon, good or bad, but Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. 2 years later, when Absalom was having his flocks sheared at Baal-Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons.
So all of the brothers, and there were more than just Amnon and Absalom, right? David had lots of wives and lots of sons. So there's a lot of princes. Now, Absalom and Amnon are 2 of the oldest. They're 2 of the most likely to be the next kings. both of them. But he calls all of them together to the sheep shearing time. And people who know from Genesis what sheep shearing time is, it's usually right about now, by the way, when the sheep, and the goats have their long wool. And we looked at this, right? It's goats too, right? You can get Angora from the goats. This is a time of year. Like this was a season. It was a seasonal occurrence, probably time with festivals and parties, especially if you're a sheep shearer. So, which clearly these people are still interested in, even though they're kings and princesses, they still have agricultural concerns, if you will.
And Absalom came to the king and said, "Your servant is having his flocks sheared. Would your majesty and your retinue accompany your servant?" But the king answered Absalom, "No, my son, we must not all come, or we'll be a burden to you." He urged him, but he would not go, and he said goodbye to him.
So what happened there? What happened in that little scene? Absalom goes to King David and said, "We're having this shearing time. Would you come with your retinue?" And the king says, no, we'll just be a burden to you. And he urged him, but he would not go. So here's an interesting part of this story. What would have happened if King David had gone to the party? We forget that part of the story. What is he going to do? What's going to happen to David at the party? Because he urged him to go. It's not like it doesn't seem like he just does it for show. Because if he goes to his dad and says, "Hey, Dad, you should come along too." And Dad goes, "Nah, I'll just be a burden to you." You go, "Okay, bye, Dad." No, he says he urged him. He tried to get him to go. He tries to get him to go. It's not like a show. It's not like just a performance of saying, "Hey, come along with us, Dad." He seems to really want to get him to go. David didn't go. But what if David had? Keep that in mind as we read this story.
Thereupon Absalom said, "In that case, let my brother Amnon come with us." To which the king replied, "He shall not go with you." But Absalom urged him, and he sent with him Amnon and all the other princes.
So here's the weird thing about this story is that David seems to know that it's not a good idea for Amnon to go. But David's not going. And so he says, "Well, if you're not going to go, then let Amnon go." Because, he's pretty powerful too. So send him. And David says, "No." But again, Absalom urges him, begs him, pleads with him to let Amnon go. So David acquiesces when it comes to Amnon going. It seems as though David knew that Amnon would be going into a dangerous situation. It seems as though he knows that this is maybe not a good idea, but he gives into him. He gives into his brother. Now, look, we don't know what Absalom's thinking about his father right now. Just keep that in mind. At this point, we don't know what Absalom's feeling about David, because all we know about David so far in this whole situation is that David heard about it and was greatly upset. No, he didn't do anything. Let's see this, the translation. The translation we have ends there. The Septuagint ends, "But he did not rebuke his son Amnon, for he favored him since he was the firstborn." So the Septuagint may have kept a version of this story that could be a commentary, could have been a commentary by the writers of the Septuagint, but it also could have been we know the book of Samuel is a corrupted text. We know that it's not a great biblical copy. that there actually might have been more to this story. Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't, I mean, I would argue it doesn't really matter. We know why David doesn't do anything to some extent, because he likes Amnon. He is one of the, again, he's the heir apparent, maybe. And he can't really do anything, maybe, because you can make the argument that David is not a great father who doesn't really know how to discipline any of his kids. But even if he does, he also seems to know that everything that's happening now was part of the prophecy that Nathan had laid down. And there seems to be almost a willingness, as David watches this stuff unfold, him saying, it's what God wants. I can't really do anything about it. The prophet Nathan came and told me all this was going to happen. And watch as this unfolds, and not just this part of the story, but all the story, that David seems to be, I'm not going to say he's okay with it. He doesn't seem to be, he's not happy with it, but he also seems to be a little bit he seems to be accepting of it, understanding that this is his punishment, at least from his standpoint. It still doesn't really deal with the fact that he lets this play out in his house and he doesn't do anything about it. He's very ineffectual, which again, when we look at Genesis story, we also see with Jacob, when his own daughter is raped and he doesn't do anything about it. So keep in mind that this theme is also part of that cycle of Jacob stories. So Absalom, we're not really sure if David goes too, whether he was done. But Absalom is successful at going, because he says, and David sent Amnon and all the other princes. So David maybe going against his better judgment, whatever he does, which again, we'll take a look at it, but think about Joseph being sent out to his brothers. Jacob knew that Joseph was hated by the brothers. He knew it. He still sends him out. In that case, he wasn't asked to send him out. He just did it. But it's a similar situation. You're sending a guy into the lion's dens, or into the sharks, if you will. So here's what happens.
Now, Absalom gave his attendants these orders. Watch. And when Amnon is merry with wine, and I tell you to strike down Amnon, kill him. Don't be afraid, for it is I who give you the order. Act with determination like brave men. Absalom's attendants did to Amnon as Absalom had ordered, whereupon all the other princes mounted their mules and fled.
Yeah, that's an interesting scene. So Absalom's buddies, his attendants, his retinue, kill Amnon. And he says, don't worry about it. I'm ordering it. It's on me. You have nothing to worry about. Still kind of a scary thing, but he says, be brave. Just do it. And the other brothers get the heck out of there. They get on their mules and they ride away.
It's the red shearing.
It's the red shearing. Except these guys all get out.
Yeah, they get out.
Now, again, if Absalom really wanted to do, create some chaos, he could have killed all these guys, which we read about. We read about that earlier in the book of Judges, when Avimelech kills all of his brothers, all of Gideon's sons. He murders 70 of his brothers, or actually one of them got away. But this is a horrible story. But he got his vengeance. Absalom got his vengeance. He killed his brother. He killed the rapist. And I think there's a real. I think they did. Come on, King David. Oh yeah, but they knew why their brother killed the brother. David knew about it. I would say that at this point, if David knows, everybody knows what happened to No, but I mean, assuming that there's a couple dozen, that these guys do get out, because yes, they could be killed too. I mean, once you kill one brother, you might as well kill everybody. But again, there's this question of what if David had gone? Was David going to be dead if he had gone? Would he have killed David? Would he have said to his father, you let this happen. You didn't punish him. You deserve to die too. And guess what? Now I get to be king. And then you would have to argue, you have to kill all the other brothers too, to make sure there were no other heirs around. But maybe that's why they got out of there. They don't want to take the chance that this is now Absalom's killed one king, prince. He can kill any possible heir. He was now going to be, yes. So Absalom is now, it seems to be the next oldest. Absalom is now next in line, or at least very close to being next in line to be king. Remember, they have different mothers. So you can make the argument, we don't know which king is going to be, which prince is going to be king, because we don't know which mother is favored, because a lot of it had to do with the moms too. And we know that this happens. I mean, it happened. We saw it happen just recently in Jordan, where, when King Hussein died, there was a real question of which one of his, because he had 3 wives. King Hussein had 3 wives. There was a real question whether, which prince was going to eventually be king. And Abdullah, the oldest one, did get to be king, but there was jockeying going on to, Queen Noor, the last, I don't know if she was actually, I think there was another queen after her, but Queen Noor, the American queen, the queen from America, tried to get her son to be made king, and it didn't work. So it could have been also who your mom was. Now, Absalom's mother, as we said, was not an Israelite. She was a Geshurite. She's a princess of Geshur, which is going to be critical for our story in a verse or two. You'll see why that's important. Yeah, well, she's a prince. Her father is king. Her father, Talmai. We're going to see him in just a second. The brothers all get out. And again, does Absalom think he's going to be king? Well, maybe. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, for the story will get more complex. Here we go.
They were still on the road when a rumor reached David that Absalom had killed all the princes and that not one of them had survived. At this, David rent his garment and lay down on the ground, and all his courtiers stood by with their clothes rent.
So David believes that everyone was killed at first, which, again, we know the story of Gideon and his sons, and so we know that it's possible. We know that a brother is capable of killing all of the other heirs, and it happened. I mean, it used to happen in Turkey, Ottoman Turkey. The stories of,
It was practically customary.
yeah, the princes knew kind of that when their brother was going to be king, that they were dead, because the brother didn't want to have any rivals, and so they would get killed. They'd either try to get out of the country, or they just realized, hey, I'm going to live a short life. Why Harry left. So, well, listen, there is something to be said for people who know that they're not going to be king, that they can live a slightly different life, right? And that's the same thing that Andrew had too, which was, I'm not going to be king, so what difference does it make? So there is sometimes a sense of that. Absalom doesn't seem to have the sense that he's not going to be king, as we're about to see, but he definitely could have, and maybe he could have killed his brothers. But that's not what he wants. He wants vengeance. It doesn't seem at that point that he's necessarily concerned about anything other than vengeance, because you could make the argument he could have killed his brothers, because if he kills all the brothers, then he almost puts himself in a situation where, if you want a king, I'm it. Now, of course, that's not the case, because there's baby Solomon back in the palace. He's too young to come out on this kind of party. And there probably were other kings there were princes. Yeah. There are other princes back at home who are probably also too young to be at the party. But yeah, these are brothers who are all probably in their 20s by this point. And so they're all eligible heirs, but they all got out. David doesn't know that until his people tell him, hey, that's an interesting thing. They were on the road when a rumor reached David. That's all it says, is a rumor reached David. And so they all rend their clothes. The same thing, the kriya, vaikra, which is what we do when we hear someone's died, we tear our clothes. So they tore their clothes. But here's what happens.
But Yonadab, the son of David's brother Shema, said, "My lord must not think that all the young princes have been killed. Only Amnon is dead, for this has been decided by Absalom ever since his sister Tamar was violated. So my lord the king must not think for a moment that all the princes are dead. Amnon alone is dead."
Yeah. And so Yonadav tells King David, again, this is David's nephew. You can see how these people are floating around and giving advice, and
Interesting that the news gets there ahead of the princes. I mean, how does that even happen?
yeah. And again, when we look at the story, as Mike just pointed out, that's the same dude. That's David's nephew. Now, what the heck is going on there? What's going on there with this Yonadav? He seems to always be at the right place at the right time. He seems to be part of the inner circle, right? And this is part of the other challenge of what's going on in David's own house to some extent, which is that there are cousins, there are nephews, there are other people around the house that sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not helpful. Sometimes they seem to be creating more problems than helping. And that's an important part of this story too, of David's family, which is the wider family, the extended family is also part of this story. Yoav and his family, David's brothers and their family. But this is part of the problem, is that this court of David was scheming and was doing things behind people's backs. Sometimes it appears that they're helping when they're really not helping. And then, what is this guy Yonadav doing in the first place? Telling Amnon how to rape his sister, his own sister, his cousin? I mean, what's going on here? This is not good stuff. There's no way that this is considered to be, and Yonadav's now here saying, "Oh, it's not as bad as you thought, King David. It's only Amnon that's dead," who's supposed to be his friend, by the way. And Absalom's been planning to do this ever since the rape. He's been sitting with this for 2 years. 2 years, which means there's at least been one shearing time that went by where he didn't do it. So if he's planning to do it at a shearing time, he didn't do it the first shearing time. Maybe he thought it'll be too obvious. Can't do it yet. Vengeance is a dish best served cold. But I mean, in reality, it's also this issue of, if you want to get away with it, you gotta sometimes bide your time. This is really, really sad. It's really, really, really sad. So if you want to, again, you can't. I mean, how do you even get into this? I mean, the initial situation, the consequences that follow from it, it's terrible. But this is why most people don't know what's in the Bible, because they never read this as kids. You can't teach this to kids. Mike just said, how do you teach this to it? There's no way to make this palatable for a kid. That's why when we read King David, most of us finish with the story of him becoming king, or just read the story of David and Goliath, and that's it. We don't know about this story of Bathsheba and this story here. These are horrible stories. And you can't teach them to kids. So.
Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. The watchman on duty looked up and saw a large crowd coming from the road to his rear from the side of the hill. Yonadav said to the king, "See, the princes have come. It is just as your servant has said."
Yeah, like I'm vindicated. I told you so. They're all coming back.
As he finished speaking, the princes came and broke into weeping, and David and all his courtiers wept bitterly too. Absalom had fled, and he came to Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And King David mourned over his son a long time.
So everybody's crying. Everyone's sad. There's nothing good that's come out of this. And Absalom has fled. He goes to his grandfather. Yeah. So Yeshur is up in the Golan Heights area. So most likely it's either Canaanite. We've excavated a little around Geshur. We found a little bit of what was going on in the kingdom there. It is also on the border with Syria. It could have been kind of Syrian, Aramean type peoples. They're not Israelites. They're Syria, Aram, the country we call Aram, right? The people that are living in Damascus and that area north of the Golan Heights, northeast of there. And so by about 100 years later, there's no more Geshur. But it had said in the book of Joshua that this area, which is in the tribal area of Manasseh, part of the area that Manasseh got on the other side of the half tribe, that part of Manasseh that's living on the east side of the Jordan River, that the Geshurites they did not get rid of them. The king of Geshur, that city, stayed intact. And as we talked about, the tribes didn't eradicate and they were not successful at getting everybody out of the land. And the Geshurites were one of those people. And King Talmai was one of those people. Now, again, sometime during King Solomon's reign, or maybe a little bit after King Solomon's reign, there is no Geshur anymore. That city was no longer a functioning city. It was now destroyed or made part of the, but there's no king of Geshur anymore. So, look, King David had a good enough relationship with the Geshurites that he married a princess. He married Talmai's daughter, Maacah. I mean, he was married to a Geshurite, and Absalom goes back to his family, that side of the family's home, and he lives with his grandfather as king. Is protected by the king. Now, David, you could make the argument, could have gone to war against Geshur and destroyed it and taken his son, but he doesn't seem to want to do that. He also, it says, he mourns his son for a long time. We assume that means Amnon, that he's mourning Amnon, but is he also mourning Absalom? Is he also mourning his loss? Could be, right? And this is part of the problem of where is David's emotions? Where are they even directed? He's obviously upset. It says he's mourning. Bait Abel, which is the word we use, Avel is a mourner, that he's mourning as if he's dead. So again, does he see his son Absalom as if he's dead? Is he mourning for his dead son Amnon? Is he mourning the situation that's happening here? Look, I mean, the point is that his life has gotten really, really bad at home. And all of his victories, all the success that he's had as a king, he's now dealing with this. And there can't be anything worse than this. So everybody is upset. Everybody. And here's what it says.
And King David was pining away for Absalom. Oh, and Absalom, who had fled to Geshur, remained there 3 years. And King David was pining away for Absalom, for the king had gotten over Amnon's death.
So was his mourning for Amnon now over? And was it referring to Amnon's death? Or was he still pining for the word? Was he pining for Absalom? Because he was comforted. The word nicham, that he was, I wouldn't say gotten over, but that I'm sure what the King James says, comforted over. Yeah, it's a better translation is comforted. I'd say gotten over. It's comforted. Exactly. He's reached a stage of being able to, and I mean, that's why they try to say gotten over, because it's not that they had forgotten, but I don't know, gotten over seems to be more like they'd forgotten, but he had mourned enough to get on with his life. So I mean, that's really the kind of But Nacham, the word for, Menachem or Nahum, all those names that come from that mean to comfort, right? And that's the sense that he was comforted and he felt a sense of comfort, whatever comes after someone dies, when you feel comforted, that he felt that, which again, his son was brutally murdered by another one of his sons, but that he does feel a sense of comfort. And at that point, he's pining away for Absalom. He's only feeling a sense of, I want Absalom to be here. That he wants Absalom there. I wonder why. So the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Septuagint add, the spirit of the king was pining for him. Again, I don't know that it changes it a lot, but again, you understand, he wants his son back. He wants Absalom. Again, the problem, of course, is that Absalom has now gotten away with murder. Now, you could say it's justifiable to some extent because of the rape, but still, I mean, what do? You have a guy who's committed a murder, who's fled justice, he's fled the consequences. Absalom is now living on the run. He's living in exile. So chapter 14 begins with that situation, what to do.
Joab, son of Zeruiah, could see that the king's mind was on Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a clever woman from there. He said to her, pretend you are in mourning, put on mourning clothes, and don't anoint yourself with oil, and act like a woman who has grieved a long time over a departed one. So
here again, we have one of the courtiers, one of the inner band of people, in this case, Joab, King David's cousin, his general, his assistant, his next in command almost. She's the one that he trusts with lots of things. And David sees, Joab sees that David is obsessed with and is too much, he's focusing too much on Absalom in that situation. So he wants to get Absalom back. And so Joab comes up with a plan, another clever trickery situation here, where he goes and gets a woman from Tekoa, which is just outside of Jerusalem, the area of Tekoa. It is a settlement now. Tekoa is a settlement where people live on the West Bank or in Judea, in the area of Judea, where Jews have once again made that a Jewish settlement surrounded by Palestinian villages. But Tekoa is famous for a few things: prophets, Prophet Amos is from Tekoa, but this wise woman from Tekoa. And what's interesting about it is they translate it as a clever woman. What's the King James translation? A wise woman. Clever, I think, it has this kind of understanding of somebody who tricks people. Clever, sharp. But she's a chachama. It means wise, a sage woman. Could be translated as chacham, means wisdom. So what I think is interesting about this is that the title here, there seems to be an understanding that either that this woman was a known advisor, a smart woman, or that there was a title of women that were called Isha Chachama, that was a title for women who were, I wouldn't necessarily say rabbis. I mean, they're rabbis, they're not called rabbis, but that they are some type of sages in their villages, in their communities, that it's known that they are. Because the way that this is almost laid out is that he goes to Tekoa to get that woman. Now, it could be that, again, she was really well known for being a smart person, but he uses her for this scene. So it's almost as if she's like an actress That would be one thing.
Mhm.
She was an actress, but that's not what it says she is. It says that she's a wise woman, which means that, again, if she's a prophet, if she's a counselor, if she's an advisor, but she seems to be well known. I think by the context here, she is somebody who other people knew to be wise. I mean, he seems to know that he has to go to there to get her. Yes, there are midrashim about who she is. Yeah, they don't like people not to have a name or only to be used once. So so I will show you that again. Let's see. I'll show you. Yeah, it doesn't say it there, but that was the Wikipedia page on the wise woman of Tekoa. But it does seem that, I mean, I think that there's a understanding of the fact that there are these women that are known for this. Now, again, she's involved in trickery. You know, she's going to be involved in kind of getting David to that she is going to be involved in getting David to bring Absalom back. But let's take a look, because, you know, again, if you look at what women could do in those days. Wait a second. It's not good. There seems to be this understanding that this was not, that this was not an easy thing, would not have been an easy thing to do. So here, so again, it reminds us too of the way that Nathan kind of tricks David into coming up with a judgment against himself. This scene is reminiscent of that David kind of needs to be led into the decisions that he makes, kind of using his own wisdom, his own, you know, kind of coming up with his own judgments. So here's what he tells her to do. Again, go to the king.
Go to the king and say to him thus and thus. And Joab told her what to say. The woman of Tekoa came to the king, flung herself face down to the ground and prostrated herself. She cried out, "Help, O king!" The king asked her, "What troubles you?" And she answered, "Alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your maidservant had 2 sons. The 2 of them came to blows out in the field where there was no one to stop them, and one of them struck the other and killed him. Then the whole clan confronted your maidservant and said, 'Hand over the one who killed his brother, that we may put him to death for the slaying of his brother, even though we wipe out the heir.' Thus they would quench the last ember remaining to me and leave my husband without name or remnant upon the earth." The king said to the woman, "Go home. I will issue an order in your behalf."
So the wise woman comes to David and basically says, "Here, I'm a widow. That's important because she's not going to have any more kids with her husband. I have 2 sons. One of them killed the other one. And now our family's saying we have to put the other one to death because that's justice. That's frontier justice. I mean, that's justice. It's an eye for an eye. If we kill my other son, my surviving son, then I have no more sons. And I have no more, my husband's gone from the earth. It's like he never lived. How can we do this?" So she says to David, "What am I going to do? What do we do?" And David says, "Go home. I will issue an order. I will come up with a decision. I'll give you a decision of justice."
And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, my lord king, may the guilt be on me and my ancestral house. Your majesty and his throne are guiltless. The king said, if anyone says anything more to you, have him brought to me, and he will never trouble you again.
So the woman is very smart. She's very smart. She says, look, this is my problem. You don't have to worry about the consequence of your decision. You didn't do anything wrong, which is interesting because she asked for a decision, but of course she's being very, very flattering to him. And of course is laying out the things to him that he's thinking about for himself, which is that your majesty and his throne are guiltless. She's actually verbalized what David wants to hear, which is that whatever happens, it's not you, it's not on you. And then David's response to her is, don't let anyone trouble you. If anyone troubles you, I'll take care of it. Right? So here's what happens.
She replied, let your majesty be mindful of the Lord your God and restrain the blood avenger bent on destruction, so that my son may not be killed. And he said, as the Lord lives, not a hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Then
Wait, hold on a second. So she doesn't even have to leave. By the time she's there in front of him, he's rendered his judgment. She's gotten him to say what she wants him to say, which is that there's not going to be any vengeance on this boy, on this son of yours. Your son is safe. Don't let anyone hurt him. He is not going to be killed. There's not going to be any blood avenger here. Blood for blood thing, it doesn't apply. He gets to live. She got him to say what she wanted him to say. She's not done.
Then the woman said, please let your maidservant say another word to my lord the king. Speak on, said the king. And the woman said, why then have you planned the like against God's people? In making this pronouncement, your majesty condemns himself, in that your majesty does not bring back his own banished one. We must all die. We are like water that is poured out on the ground and cannot be gathered up. God will not take away the life of one who makes plans so that no one may be kept banished. And the reason I have come to say these things to the king, my lord, is that the people have frightened me. Your maidservant thought I would speak to your majesty. Perhaps your majesty would act on his handmaid's plea. For your majesty would surely agree to deliver his handmaid from the hands of anyone who would seek to cut off both me and my son from the heritage of God. Your maidservant thought, let the word of my lord the king provide comfort, for my lord the king is like an angel of God, understanding everything good and bad. May the Lord your God be with you.
Wow. She's very, very clever, this woman, the way she did it. Because again, Yoav basically told her what to do, but she seems to be able to do it. And we don't really know exactly what he told her because he just said, and say so-and-so. But she figures out a way to get David to basically renounce the banishment of his own son. And she does it in such a way that she flatters him, that she makes him feel comforted, that she makes him feel like the decision that he's going to make is a just decision. It's a decision that should be made. It's a decision that he would make for someone else. And so she says, if you'd make it for someone else, make it for yourself. It's a very, very powerful scene.
In reply, the king said to the woman, do not withhold from me anything I ask you. The woman answered, let my lord the king speak. The king asked, is Yoav in league with you in all this? The woman replied, as you live, my lord the king, it is just as my lord the king says. Yes, your servant Yoav was the one who instructed me, and it was he who told your maidservant everything she was to say.
So he knows who it was who put her up to this. And he says to her,
He could smell Yoav a mile off.
he knows who's responsible for this. This is all the work of Yoav.
It was to conceal the real purpose of the matter that your servant Yoav did this thing. My Lord is as wise as an angel of God, and he knows all that goes on in the land.
So she says, of course, you knew it because you know everything. And Yoav did this so that, again, you would not know that, he's coming to tell you. He didn't want to come to tell you himself and say, or maybe he did and it didn't work, but Yoav has basically used me to get this to happen. And yeah, you knew it. You know everything. Compliments him again. Calls him again an angel of God.
Then the king said to Yoav, I will do this thing. Go and bring back my boy Absalom.
So notice again that it is Yoav who wants Absalom to come back. It's Yoav who asks for Absalom to be reinstated, to be brought back. This is very important for the story of what happens to Absalom in the future. It is Yoav who advocated for Absalom's return. Keep that in mind. This is all important for the story, that it was Yoav who did this. And the king says to Yoav, okay, you got it. Go and bring him back. And of course, he doesn't just say, go and bring back Absalom, go and bring back my boy. It's actually bring back my boy. It's not my boy Absalom. What's it, King James there, Mary? What does it say? Yeah, it's kind of a better translation, but again, he does call him his boy, or the boy. But there's a sense here to some extent that Yoav is his boy, maybe. He's a boy, he's a nar, he's a young man. There is a sense that I'm bringing him back necessarily even as a prince, but I'm bringing him back as a young man, as a guy who made a mistake, or as my son, or as we use the word nar sometimes actually to indicate a young man who doesn't really know any better. A nar in Yiddish is actually a kind of a foolish teen. What? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's right there at Avshalom. Now, which of course is an ironic name, right? Because Avshalom means my father's peace. That's not what Avshalom is at all. This is his father's peace. Avshalom, the peace of my father. It's a very ironic name.
Yoav flung himself face down on the ground and prostrated himself. Yoav blessed the king and said, today your servant knows that he has found favor with you, my lord king, for your majesty has granted his servant's request. And Yoav went at once to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. But the king said, let him go directly to his house and not present himself to me. So Absalom went directly to his house and did not present himself to the king.
So this is critical to the story. Absalom comes back to Jerusalem, but he does not come back in front of his father. This is very important because Absalom doesn't have to live in exile anymore, but there's a difference between living in exile and being able to be part of the court. David says he's not coming into my court. He tells him, don't bring him in. Don't bring him in. Well, yeah, whether you have to go to America or whether that's more, again, do you go into exile or do you just live in the country and just never come into the court? This is all part of the power of this story, the complexity of the story. And I would argue the truth of the story, because I really do believe the story really happened. I mean, I really think that this story just the plausibility of this story seems to be there for so many reasons, not least of which is the descriptions are very, very intricate. And they don't seem to, like, there's a story within a story, and it's actually like, it doesn't make sense that part of the story would also be invented, because you don't have to invent the story if the story itself didn't happen. You can just tell the story. it's written by somebody who knew exactly what happened. Because somebody told them, which would have had to be Tamar. Somebody had told them exactly what had happened. Somebody in the inner circle of Absalom and Tamar, somebody who was there with them, who talked to them right after it happened. And here's where we read specifically about Absalom's own beauty.
No one in all Israel was so admired for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he was without blemish. When he cut his hair, he had to have it cut every year, for it grew too heavy for him. The hair of his head weighed 200 shekels by the royal weight.
So not only was
A
it
sheep.
beautiful hair, he had beautiful long hair, which seems to be pretty important for the story too. His beautiful long hair. So he's a rock star. And he is, yeah. And so like his sister, he's beautiful.
I doubt that part is literally true.
Listen, the fact that his hair would weigh 200 shekels seems crazy big.
Yeah.
But the point is that his hair grew, I mean, there are people who grow hair faster than other people. But the fact that his hair was so long, that grew longer and everyone knew it grew longer is definitely important, as we know, for the story. For those who've read the story before, this is a critical part of the story, his long hair. But of course, it's somewhat of an exaggeration. He must have had some blemish, but the idea that this guy is gorgeous, kind of like you, but he is also half Gesherite, remember? So he's not all from the tribe of Judah or from Israel. So I don't know. I guess he didn't really have long hair, but he's kind of like Paul Newman. He's only half Jewish, but he's a good looking guy. But the point is that he's got beautiful long hair too, which again, the women must have gone crazy for this guy. And this is part of the problem for David, as we're going to see.
Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem 2 years without appearing before the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. He sent for him a second time, but he would not come.
So Absalom had a daughter named Tamar. So either he named her Tamar or after his sister. We don't really know what happens to Tamar. I will tell you that story. We really don't know. I mean, did she kill herself? Did she should she go crazy? But she named her Tamar after her aunt. It's kind of a tragic story. It could have. Yeah, it could have. That tradition of, remember, that's an Ashkenazi tradition. Sephardic Jews do it all the time. But it also seems to be this idea that, again, maybe this is a way of rescuing the name. It means a date. It's a date like the fruit, the date palm, right? The sweetness, which of course is ironic because, again, Tamar does not have a sweet life. Maybe. But her dad has, again, 3 sons and a daughter. He's there for 2 years now. So he was gone for 2 years. He's back home for 2. Well, remember, now Amnon's been dead for about, almost a decade, better part of a decade, 7-8 years ago, he was killed. A couple of years he's in exile. Well, a couple of years he waits, then he kills him and goes in exile for a couple of years. That'll be 4 years. And now he's a couple of years back in Jerusalem and he still hasn't seen his, so his life, Absalom's life for the last 6-7 years has been all crazy. Yeah, it's a good question. Did he marry somebody in Geshur? Doesn't really say. But he's here back in Jerusalem with his family, and it tells us just a little bit about him. He's old enough to have had kids. He's old enough to have been married. He's been living this weird life for a couple of years. And he tries to get Yoav to come to see him. Well, you're going to see why. I mean, you can already figure it out. He's like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm at home, but no one, I can't get anybody. I can't get in front of the king. And Yoav isn't even coming to see him. I mean, he trusted Yoav. Yoav was the one who came and got him. Keep this in mind.
So Absalom said to his servants, look, Yoav's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Yoav came at once to Absalom's house and said to him, why did your servants set fire to my field? Absalom replied to Yoav, I sent for you to come here. I wanted to send you to the king to say on my behalf, why did I leave Geshur? I would be better off if I were still there. Now let me appear before the king, and if I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death.
So he says, what did I come here for? This is flat out. I could have still been in exile. What's the good of being here? If he wants to punish me, I'll take my punishment. But I can't, I don't want to live in exile here. To some extent, it's even worse. I mean, that's what he says. So I'd be better off in exile.
Yoav went to the king and reported to him, whereupon he summoned Absalom. He came to the king and flung himself face down to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom.
Now, at the end of chapter 14, it seems like everything's been forgiven and everything's good. It ends kind of on a happy note.
Not for long.
There's this restoration of him with his father, I don't know if it's reconciliation, restoration, whatever you want to say. But, Absalom humbles himself before the king. The king kisses him. Yoav, does his job. Though again, it is funny how he gets Yoav to respond, right? By burning his fields down. Then he gets him to come out. But again, to some extent, it's Absalom showing Yoav that, look, I'm a prince. You're the general. You're the cousin, but you're not like me. And it's an interesting scene. But just keep in mind who Yoav is, what he's capable of doing, because we know what he's capable of doing. He stabbed a man essentially in cold blood with Abner, and he is capable of doing some crazy stuff. David knows it. Absalom must have known it. And so this is who they're dealing with. He's part of the inner circle. So we're going to read a little bit more. No, we're not going to read a little bit more. We're going to stop there. And I'm just going to show you something for that's really important, which is we just read these 2 chapters from the book of Samuel. But I will tell you, again, for those who are not with us on Wednesday nights, what you actually just saw was a repetition of some of the very same things that we saw in Genesis. So we're going to just take a quick look back for those who were not with us, or for those who were, just to refresh your memory of what happens in Genesis, which is that Jacob had a daughter named Dinah. And Dinah went out into the land of the Canaanites, and Shechem, the prince, another prince, right, saw her and lay with her, took her and lay with her and disgraced her. Now, I do want to point out that some people wonder whether Dinah was in fact really raped, because the translation here is disgraced her, forced himself on her. What's the King James translation? Genesis chapter 34, verse 2. Defiled her. Now look at what happens to. It hasn't shown up yet. Hold on a second. Let's look real quickly at what happens with let me just make sure. Here. Let's make sure that I can show you what happens with Tamar. What it says is, look at the words. He would not listen to her. He overpowered her. He lay with her, and he lay with her by force. But look at those same words there. Vaya'aneha and ve'ishkavoto. Right? Words that we see in Genesis. Back page, it didn't show us. Were again, sorry. Vayishkav oto vaya'aneha. It's those same words. Ya'aneha and vayishkav. Okay? It's those same words. Now, the weird thing about this story is that in this story, the guy actually loves her after he rapes her. The reversal of that story. Now, of course, the story is remarkable because after this happens, Shechem says to his father, I want to marry her. And then we remember the story for those who read it. Jacob's sons, when they hear about this, they say to, or Jacob, when he hears of it, he kept silent until they came home. Very similar to what King David does, which is nothing. Right? Doesn't do anything. The kids come home and they say it's something not to be done, right? Which is the same thing that Tamar said to her brother, half brother. It's not to be done. This is something that's not to be done. Jacob's sons say, this is not to be done. And they trick everybody in the city to be circumcised, and then they come in and they kill everybody. Right? And at the end of the story, it says they kill them, they slew all the males, and they seized their flocks, took all that stuff. And then when Jacob says to his sons, Shimon and Levi, the main participants in this slaughter, they say, what will happen to me if my house will destroy? And they said, should our sister be treated like a whore? That's their answer. That's the way the story ends. And now this story ends with the sister, to some extent, being vindicated, being punished, the perpetrator being punished. But again, it's very reminiscent of that story. Let's just look at one of the next chapters in the Bible. Let's look real quickly at chapter 37, since we have it here. Joseph was the best of his sons. He was a child of his old age, and he had an ornamented tunic, tonet pasim. He had an ornamented tunic, and he was the beloved son. And then we have the dreams, the story of the dreams. The brothers are out to pasture their father's flock. And Israel said to Joseph, you got to go see them. And he says, Hineni. And then he says, go to see how they're doing. And of course, he goes out to see him, and he gets thrown into a pit. But in this case, again, you have a guy going to his own death. To some extent, the father knows. Jacob knows what's going on. So you have the flocks are part of the story. They cast him in the pit, etc. Judah says, let's sell him. They pull him out of the pit. Reuben doesn't know it. That's part of the story too. They took Joseph's tunic. They slaughtered a kid and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they took it and they said, examine your son's tunic. Here, by the way, it doesn't say that it's torn. Later on, it says that the tunic was torn. Later on in Genesis, it says. But the idea is that it was torn, and then he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes. Or it says actually put on sackcloth. And he's very upset that his son was taken. Then we look at the next chapter, chapter 38. We have the very weird story of Judah and his daughter-in-law, whose also his name is Tamar. But what do we know about Judah is that he has a friend. His name is Hira, the Adulamite. And again, what's so weird about this wife of his that he takes a Canaanite wife. And it's interesting that we don't know anything about her name, except that her father's name is Shua, right there. And so this girl, this woman, a Canaanite woman, his name is Bat Shua. That seems to be a little bit of coincidence. She was a Bat Ish Kanani, Ushma Shua, you know. She's Bat Shua. She's daughter of a guy named Shua. And then she has kids with him, and these kids end up, the oldest one is married to a woman named Tamar. This can't be a coincidence. And Tamar dies before giving his wife a child. We don't know exactly why. And then the next son, Onan, is supposed to go in and have a baby with the wife, and he doesn't do that. He spills his seed on the ground, and he dies too. And then the last son, Shelah, is supposed to marry Tamar, and Judah doesn't give her to her. So what's interesting about that is that Judah kind of makes her wait for no reason. And well, he doesn't want his daughter-in-law to kill another one of his sons, but it says that Judah's up with the sheep shearers together with his friend Hira. And Tamar was told, your father is up in Timnah for the sheep shearing. Notice the sheep shearing. And this story is very strange because, of course, what happens is Judah ends up sleeping with his daughter-in-law, not knowing that she is his daughter-in-law, ends up having sex with her and doesn't pay for it, ends up giving her stuff instead as collateral, you know, gives her his seal and his staff, a bunch of stuff. His basically, as we talked about, his wallet, gives her his wallet and his driver's license, including in the you know, the keys to the car. You wonder again, why would he do it? He was in the mood to have some sex, and so he doesn't really think of the consequences. Similar story, even again, happens at a similar time, which is during the sheep shearing, and they can't find the woman, and that's part of the story. But it doesn't really end there, the similarities, because again, Judah is told that the woman is pregnant, his daughter-in-law is pregnant. He thinks that she's a harlot. Well, he made her the harlot, if you will, and he says she should be burned. And then she comes forward with the symbols of Judah, and she realizes that Judah was the one who was wrong, that she was right. So here again, you have a woman kind of teaching a man what the right thing to do was, very much like the woman of Tekoa, you know, kind of getting David to do the right thing. She ends up having twins, and those twins, one of them ends up being the ancestor of King David, who we just read about. So this can't be a coincidence. So these stories that we read are then revisited in the book of Samuel, and the themes and the issue of having a friend who gives you, you know, who's helping you along, and the sheep shearing and the names, all of this stuff it's too coincidental. And so some people say, well, it's written by the same author. Well, okay, fine. So it's written by the same author, but that's not the end of it, because clearly the point of these stories in Genesis is to some extent to set up what we read about here, what we're reading right now, which is the story of King David. And there's this idea that this has been foretold in the book of Genesis, that all of these things that are playing out in David's life to some extent have already happened to our ancestors. And so what's interesting about that is I wouldn't say it necessarily takes him off the hook, but it definitely gives us this sense that, yeah, David's got a bunch of stuff going on. And isn't it kind of reminiscent of what happened to our ancestors? And therefore, it's problematic. It's not good, but it's also, these things happen. And they're tragic and they're not good and they're not the way things are supposed to be, but they somehow have a way of working out for the best down the road. And by the time we're done with David and we get his son, I'm not ruining the story, it's history, Solomon. When we get to that point, it's almost as if when we finish the book of Genesis, which we're about to do in our Wednesday night class, though we don't have class tomorrow night for those who join us on Wednesday night. I'm taking my wife out for her birthday. Tomorrow night is Tracy's birthday. So we're going out for her birthday. There's no Wednesday night class, but we're almost done with this. We read this a few weeks ago, chapter 39, actually about a month and a half ago. But there is this sense that when we get to Solomon, just as when we get to the end of the book of Genesis, that it wasn't the way things maybe we'd like them to be. It didn't play out the way they should, but they played out in a way that we can understand that sometimes to get to point A, from point A to point B or point A to point Z, there's a lot of stops along the way and they're not always easy, but we move on and we say, hey, look, we got a result that we can at least say, we're going to make it. It wasn't easy, but we made it. And there definitely is a sense like when we come to the end of the book of Samuel, which we will in a few weeks, that we got there. It wasn't easy. Wasn't without a lot of problems, but we did get there. And it seems like that's really to some extent the purpose of the book of Genesis. We always say, well, it's about the first families. It's about how we got to Egypt. But there also seems to be a very, very hard message there in Genesis that maybe this is also to vindicate King David. That, maybe we're supposed to look at King David as another guy like Jacob who didn't have an easy life, especially when it came to his own family. There's some other similarities that we'll get to when we get to him with his own son. Jacob had a son, Reuben, who slept with Bilhah, his stepmother, if you will, the concubine, which we'll read about with David, as we already kind of even alluded to. You already heard Nathan's prophecy that you're going to have a son that's going to sleep with your wives. Well, that's what happened with Reuben. So you see these stories that play out to some extent. Was Genesis really a way to vindicate and to soften the blows of what happened in David's own house? So I hope you saw, and I took you through it real quick, and we just looked through 4 chapters of Genesis, or 3 chapters of Genesis, 34, 37, and 38. But you can see the similarities. They cannot be a coincidence. So with that, we're going to correct. And if you look at Genesis, it is really an amazing book. And again, these 2 books of the Bible, Samuel and Genesis, are really my 2 favorite books of the Bible because of their connections, but also because of the human emotion that plays out in them. I mean, to me, the scene of in Genesis of Joseph and his brothers is very powerful, but so is the story of Amnon and Tamar, and so is the story of David and Michal, his wife looking down at him and saying, what a fool you are. And David, now dealing with Absalom, I promise you that next week, as we read the book of Genesis, the conclusion of Absalom's story, it's a very powerful story, and one that arguably is in some ways is the biggest tragedy, human tragedy in the whole Bible, is David and Absalom's relationship. Because you can see the love that he has for Absalom. You've seen it already. And you can see how hard it is for the way this plays out. So again, the Michal story is very powerful to me. The fact that she loved him so much at one point and now hates him. The fact that Amnon, to me, that scene is one of the most powerful and true stories in the Bible, of a man who on one hand wanted this woman so badly that he's going to risk his life. He does risk it. He gets killed for it. The consequences are going to be he will die for this rape. And the fact that his lust was so great that he would do that, knowing that he's risking his life, and that his emotion afterwards is disgust, and he throws her out of the room. That's one of the, I would say it's one of the most powerful and the most upsetting emotionally stories in the whole Bible. And again, it's all here in King David's story. So that's why, again, we compare it to television in a lot of ways, but I don't know that anything's ever been done that's this tragic. And there's been some really good television. It's usually fictionalized, but no one's ever really done a good job of bringing the King David story to life, because it's so upsetting and it's so hard to do. And people would be upset because they don't want to see King David like this. They don't want to see King David. They don't want to see this. There's a hero. And what we learn is that it's much more complex, and he's not always a hero, obviously. And in some cases, his biggest heroism isn't defeating Goliath. It's trying to figure out how to survive. I would argue that his heroism is going to be seen in the story we're going to read next week. The heroism is never tested until you see what happens next week. So to me, yeah, it's easy to say he's a hero against Goliath because he's facing a giant and he's a little kid, but not when he's facing his own son. Because how are you a hero then? Because even if you win, you lose. With Goliath, it was easy. It wasn't easy, but if you win, you're a hero and everyone loves you. What do you do when your own son wants to kill you? And how do you defend yourself? That's it's not only heroism, that's literally the essence of who are you when things are really, like, when you're faced with literally your legacy, your character, what's going to happen? So Rosemary, you're going to be here next week, right?
Let me look. Yes.
Well, you don't have to be in the building, but we need you to.
No, not in the building, but yeah, I should be here. Yes, I will be here. Sorry, I had to go look at my calendar on the wall there.
No, say it louder.
I want you to come here and have lunch, and be here and have lunch with us.
Do you want me to come in person? Is that what she said?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
I'll see if I can do it. I'll try.
You can be like Yoav or whatever. You be the messenger. Right. Thank you, everybody.
Hopefully I'm not being summoned on pain of death here.
Don't burn down our house.
Don't set fire to my fields.
Set fire to our barley fields. All right. Here.
Bye, Francine.
Bye. Bye. Everybody.
Bye-bye.